Y'all better strap in, cause this story is fucked.
I, Dan, make no apologies for the following story. In order to convey the full horror of my experience,
I'm forced to include every grisly detail, just as it happened, and just as I felt. No, that's not bad grammar. I felt most of this story, so in the retelling, I will try to provide a feeling more than I try to provide a tale. I hope it works. Then again, I hope for your sake, it doesn't. Just know, before you start listening, that if you have triggers, the living skull will find them, and he'll throw the switch. Stop listening now if you have ever wondered, do I have a weak stomach? I won't warn you again. This began during college. I'm British and grew up in a small East Cumbrian town whose name I shall not mention, among friends whose names are changed here for their sake. I was not a good kid. I did drugs, skipped school, then college, and ran with the worst possible crowd you can imagine. We burgled houses, stole cars, vandalized property, and generally made life a misery for our victims. I'm not proud of this fact, and have served most of my life in prison for my sins. I was released just 3 years ago, at the age of 41. I was 18 when this story unfolded. I was not imprisoned for the events recounted here, but for the atrocities committed after the event. I was affected and tainted, and unable to restrain myself. But those matters are for another time. Every supervillain needs an origin story. I'm prison educated and reformed, a poster boy, if you like. I found God and now must live with my memory of my youth in the same way that a former addict must live knowing the demon he strives to avoid lingers always nearby, always available when the weakness and the pain becomes too much to bear. There's no comfort for my kind of survivor, no sympathy from those who feel the same way. We must carry our cross and keep our agonies to ourselves. Perhaps the recounting of my tale here will somehow help to alleviate some of the agony for me. Of all the members of our gang, James had leadership qualities, a James Dean lookalike, with the same mean broodiness and directionless rebellion that made Dean such a stalwart hero of his age. We were drawn to his charisma, like blue bottles congregating on a particularly fine dog turd. Like all of us kids, James was rotten inside, but not so nearly rotten as Judd. Judd was the guy we tolerated because James kept him around. James relied on Judd for various things, most of which we missed entirely because we were so young. Looking back, Judd was the true gang leader, and James was his follower. The fact that the opposite seemed true to us at the time simply highlights how fucked up the Judd situation really was. Judd was the kind of person you didn't turn your back on, even if you were his best friend. He collected knives and would often handle a knife when in company of others. He preferred switchblades, flicking the knife open and shut, his eyes always on you to see how you'd react. If you showed nerves, he would grin, because somewhere deep inside that black heart of his, he He thrived on making you feel scared. Too many people think fear is potent, that causing fear in someone else somehow opens this psychic, spiritual flow of power upon which the one causing fear then feeds. But there's nothing spiritual about fear. Fear invokes power, because the inducer can do and say anything they want, and the fearful must cower. If there's a spiritual element, it's demonic, and relates solely to the extent the inducer will go to impress their capabilities on those they wish to frighten. Judd was always willing to go all in, regardless of who you were, or how you knew him. And knowing that about him invariably scared the living shit out of anyone who suffered his company. There's a sound I shall always associate with Judd, and it's this. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and I need to backtrack a little in order to fully set the scene. October 21st, 1993. It's a cold night and we're driving from place to place in a beat-up Ford Escort, parking in darkened spots around the town, smoking weed and talking shit. I'm in the front driving, James riding shotgun, Judd, Mick, and a kid we called Porker sit in the back. James has a stash of LSD, and we've decided to take it, then see what the night brings. I've done LSD before, but never anything as strong as the stuff James has right now. But I'm young, stupid, and reckless. What do I care? I pop the paper tab on my tongue and wait for the fireworks to begin. 30 minutes later, the drugs kick in, and that's the last I remember for what, maybe 2 hours. When I emerge from whatever functioning catatonia I've entered, we're in a graveyard. Porker is pissing on a gravestone, and James is laughing hysterically. Mick is carving a pentagram in the soil with his toe, and tells us repeatedly that the living skull is telling him to do this stuff. Stuff he doesn't want to do. He's having the worst trip of his life. You can tell just by looking into his eyes. The LSD still has a good 4 hours left to run, and there's no escape for Mick. Little do I know, there's no escape for any of us now. Not even Judd, I suspect. Stupid bastard! I remember snarling as Mick squats in the center of the pentagram and defecates into the heart of the star. Judd merely watches him, eyes like two sparks of fire, flesh seething with fractals. "That's right, whore," Judd mutters as Mick shits onto the floor. "Do it on your own mother's grave, just like he told you." I black out again, or at least, there's a giant fucking void in my memory of what comes next. When memory resumes, we're in a church adjacent to the cemetery. Mick is on his knees in front of the altar, screaming for mercy, hands clasped, tears streaming down his cheeks. Judd sits silently on a nearby pew, opening and closing one of his switchblades. No, that's not the meaning of the sound. James is next to me on another pew. Porker stands on the seat, staring back towards the front door into the church. "Excuse me? How did we get in here?" I ask James, wide-eyed. James turns his eggs on me, like two discs of sperm with black peas drifting in their center, and his skin is so pale I can almost see rivers throbbing through the translucency. "The living skull," he says, voice trembling. "We're fucked, dude." Another blank in memory, and as one scene fades, another illuminates. We're walking down a darkened street, Judd and James in front, Mick staggering behind, still sobbing, face smeared with what I assume must be his own shit. Porker walks alongside me, and behind us, all I sense is someone else, feet, click-clacking, on the cold pavement. I dared not look back. I dare not look to see whose feet are making that cruel, bone-sharp noise. It's fucking Lucas, I hear Judd say. Lucas, a kid from college, has a special place in Judd's cruel heart. He's a good kid from a wealthy family and gets good grades, but he's also handsome and popular with the girls, which gives him a strange level of kudos among the denizens he calls his peers, us included. As a teenage boy always eager for my next encounter with the opposite sex, but invariably starved of such encounters, I admired Lucas the same as everyone else and found his easy manner and cool charisma somehow enchanting. Not so for Judd. Judd harbored some kind of deep-set hatred for Lucas, but we moved in different circles, and Lucas knew better than to cross Judd either on campus or in general life. Tonight, if you'll excuse the understatement, he's in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Lucas, you fucking cunt!" James yells. Lucas, probably on his way home from a girl's house if I know Lucas, turns and grins. He saunters over. "What are you knobs doing out here at this time in the morning?" He smiles white and broad, flicks his hand through his hair. I like his clothes. So much nicer than the tracksuit shit I'm wearing. I wish I had his style. "Tripping," James casually says and holds out an LSD tab. "Wanna join us?" "Yes, Lucas," Judd blinks. "Do join our little party. The Living Skull would love that." "Living what the fuck now?" Lucas chuckles nervously. "You can't see him unless you sip from the magical font," Mick says. "This is true," James laughs. "Although anything Mick says is kind of fucked up right now on account he's tripping ball sacks." Porker, dry and humorless, but imposing as the largest of our group, looms over what seems to be passing for a conversation and says, "Mick conjured him by shitting on the grave of his dead mother, and now the Living Skull is taking us to see something at Judd's house. He says we'll never forget it." "Holy shit, that's messed up," Lucas guffs. James laughs with him, and I remember feeling a sense of betrayal. Why would James laugh? After all, James has heard the click-clacking of the feet and sees what's going down in the church when the vicar's not there. I saw it too, though my mind refused to give shape to that particular scene. Lucas takes the tab and pops it in. "This I have to try," he laughs, and my mind hits a blank. The memory fades. What do I know of the Living Skull? What do any of us know? I only know what I recall, and what I recall isn't much. It was real. Not an anthology, not a poetic metaphor. Real as fuck. Real as fuck. And fucked up as fucked up can be. That much I do know. More real than I like to consider, in fact. Too much reality compressed into one place, to be honest. Thinking back now, trying to picture what the fucking thing looked like, is almost impossible. The inner eye of the mind slips over the image and drops into the surrounding vacuum. I know we found him in the graveyard, but I don't know how or why. I don't even know how or why we wound up in that black place, nor why the LSD prompted us to perform desecrations. I suspect Judd knows enough to provide the answers, but I'd never ask. I never want to see him again. My memory resumes at some time around 4 in the morning. We're in Judd's flat. I think I've been sleeping and now I'm awake. Porker is lying on the other side of the room, snoring. I'm on the carpet. James is standing by the doorway, staring. Mick is nowhere to be seen. Lucas is naked on the floor next to me, and Judd is kneeling over him, straddling his body. He's alive, Lucas, the terror on his face. Well, I can't describe it. He's quiet, though, not screaming or crying. Resigned, maybe, but somehow proud in his humility. Judd has a naked razor blade pinched between finger and thumb. His face is manic. Lust and something purely brutal infest his expression. Small cuts all over, but deep. Real deep, so that the fingers plunge in behind the blade. Lucas grits his teeth and just lets it happen. Not because he wants to, but because what can he do? Judd is muscle, and Lucas is skin, made for the eyes of women, not for brutalizing teenage boys. Judd has him pinned and fear has him pinned, and the living skull, a presence upon which I cannot focus, seems to be giving instructions in a voice that hums at the very heart of my brain. I don't count the cuts, but if I did, I'd lose count. Judd is relentless. He spares no part of the body, and seems to delve deeper with each new assault. There's no frenzy, only a laboring task. Lucas just experiences and uses his eyes to watch each excision. Lucas grunts as Judd takes his cock and starts to maneuver himself into one of the deeper torso cuts. Something red and blistering bulges through one of the cuts on Lucas's stomach as Judd penetrates and starts to fuck. It looks like blood-red haggis peeking through. Lucas is looking at me, shaking his head, though I can't tell if he's giving me a show of disapproval or suffering some kind of palsy. His body rocks gently as Judd grunts and thrusts, still working the razor blade. James? My voice sneaks out. You're next, whore. Judd's fiery eyes roll over to me, then back down to the juddering body impaled on his dick. The living skull speaks, and the voice is seismic. James raises hands to his ears and simply stares. He's gone, I think. Gone into himself and somewhere deeper still. I only wish I could follow, but in the cold calm down of the LSD trip, I'm lucid as fuck, and there's no escape. Something burns inside Lucas, and there's a sound like a water balloon exploding on concrete. He turns his face to Judd and simply says, "You're a fucking psychopath." Judd doesn't care. Egged on by the volcanic voice of the living skull, he humps until he comes, and as he comes, he buries his face into Lucas's dead flesh and feasts, his head becoming a slick thing of red, bobbing and bobbing. Lucas sobs and keeps sobbing while he shakes, racked by Judd's working jaw. At some point, Lucas dies. I close my eyes, wondering what it will feel like to die by a razor blade in cock and teeth, when I hear Mick enter the room. "Judd, man, what the fuck?" I open my eyes again and watch as Judd stands dripping and shiny, facing Mick, who carefully takes the blade from Judd's fingers, like a cop disarming a killer who lost the will to kill. "Holy motherfucking Christ, James!" Mick shakes James, but there's no response. Then he wakes Porker, who clambers to his feet, spots the Lucas mess, and vomits. "I still need to do this, fucker." Judd points at me. "No, you can't, dude." Mick turns towards me, a lighthouse beam of terror, then back to Judd. "We gotta get the fuck out of here. Jesus, Judd." James staggers forward, as though thrust forth by unseen hands. The living skull will eat the evidence. "Let's get out of here, Judd." "Yeah, Judd, come on, man," Porker pleads. Judd surveys them all, then looks at me. A thing on the floor, wanting to die. "What about this cunt?" "He's alright, Judd. Just leave it, yeah?" "Fucking hell, James." They leave. All of them. I'm left too, but in the silence in which I can hear trickling as the body beside me drains fluid I don't even know bodies contain. I manage to struggle to my feet and follow the gang outside. They pile into the car, pushing Judd in the back. Mick comes back to me. "Jesus, Dan, what the fuck?" "You'd better do one. I don't know what Judd will do if..." "I know," I mumble, looking at Mick's brown-stained face. I woke up and he was doing it. I didn't know what to do. Jesus. Mick shakes his head and jumps in the car. They drive off. I'm alone. I go home. The trip wears off. I sleep. My dreams are restless. There's a sound replayed, and I still hear it decades on. But I never saw the living skull again. In Judd's face, maybe. When I saw his picture once in a newspaper. I never saw the others again, nor would I want to. Not friends, not really. Just eyes to see.
And ears to listen. Toys for the living skull to play with. He found them prancing among the gravestones and recognized something fun.